my phone. There we go. Sorry, team. That was me. One more time. Welcome to Forward Point. How's everybody doing this morning? Yeah, my name's Jimmy. I'm one of the pastors here, and it's so great to be with you. I just wanted to start off by saying, I'm so blessed by the different relationships that we have here at Forward Point. I think my Forward Point relationships are probably my strongest relationships. I'm so appreciative of them. Yesterday we had our men's breakfast, and the guys had a great time just sharing, being vulnerable. And a lot of times you can't really experience the fullness of your relationship with God without being able to experience the relationships where you can go someplace and you can be open and honest and vulnerable and still be loved and accepted unconditionally. And we're able to experience that through relationship in men's group. We have the women's group, life groups. Here on a Sunday morning, we get to experience some of that. This last week, we had our girls had their end of the year concerts, and it was so fun. A lot of times our life group members come out and are like surrogate parents and grandparents to our kids, and it all happens because of the relationships that we've built over time. Love Handles is really just our attempt to build relationship with our community. If you're not familiar with Love Handles, it's our frozen yogurt shop here just down the block. And our goal was just to say, how can we build relationship with our community? The community really started expressing a need to have some kind of community center where kids could go after school and maybe get help with homework or do fun things. And we said, we don't really want the legal woes that come with like an official community center, but what we could do is open up some kind of place. We weren't really sure what it was going to look like, and gradually God kind of led us to some frozen yogurt shop owners and some equipment, and next thing you know, we have a frozen yogurt shop. But the goal is just to build relationship with our community, with Eastwood and with Syracuse. We feel like the greater that we can build a brand in Love Handles, the more opportunity that we're going to have to build relationship with our community. And it's a lot of fun, the different opportunities we get. This last week, we were able to have a group of fourth graders came in before the shop normally opens, and we were able to give them froyo. And just a couple days ago, we had the PTO for Huntington School came and did a fundraiser there. So there's all these different ways that we're able to just be a blessing to different organizations here in our community. We're really excited. Over last month, we were able to have the Huntington staff be one of the options to choose for our match, and we raised enough money that we're going to be able to put on an event for the staff at Huntington. We're going to get a food truck to come out and just set up over there in front of the school, and we're just going to bless them for lunch with a really cool food truck experience, because we're just looking to build relationship with the people who are closest to us. So when you go there, everything about the environment, everything about the staff is designed to build relationship with each other. You can come and you can sit at one of the tables and you can play chess, or you can play checkers, or you can play Connect Four and build relationship with each other. Or, our staff were very intentional that when they come in, they get a really warm greeting. When they leave, they get a fond farewell, right? We hope you come back. We engage with them as they're getting their toppings, and, we try to make it a judgment-free zone where we say, we don't make fun of or talk about how much froyo you have in your cup. This is a judgment-free zone, right? We are just trying to build relationship with the different people that come in through the doors. And as a result of that, we have a lot of regulars, a lot of people that we know by name, a lot of different people who just invite themselves to weddings for our staff members. There's all sorts of ways that we're building relationship. And as we're working our way through the book of Acts, this point comes to mind that we're going to look at today, is that relationship Forward Point is really the starting point, the means, and the goal of our existence. It can all be narrowed down to relationships. And this morning, we're going to look at this story in the beginning of Acts chapter 3 about some relationships and how, as we think about the way that we live, it all boils down to relationships. They start, the means, the end goal is our relationships. Now, for some of us, we know what it feels like to go through broken relationships. We know what it feels like to have, people that we are no longer in communication with, that maybe at one point we really were and now not so much, and it can often be lead to trauma. Sometimes we need therapy as a result of the damage that those broken relationships can do. But right from the beginning, we see in Genesis that God himself works in this kind of relationship perspective. It talks about how let us make man in our image, us being God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, that there's this community aspect. And then as we see in the garden, as God creates man and he breathes life into him, the breath of life, he sees man, And he compares the experience that man has to the experience that they have in the Trinity, right? They operate and they work in this community relationship aspect, and he sees Adam all by himself, and he says, man, this is not good. I look at Adam, we look at Adam, and we see all the things that he has to do solo, work on his own. He has no companionship. He doesn't get to experience the things that we get to experience operating in community and relationship. And then God created Eve, and the story goes on from there. You can even look at young babies. If you're familiar with the failure to thrive syndrome, like if a baby doesn't get the proper attention that it needs through relationship, a baby can just die because it didn't get enough physical attention, right? It's part of the way that we were created, and without it, it does not lead to good things, right? It's the starting point for all of us. It's also the means through which we live. Jesus gives this example where he comes and he just spends his 3 years of public ministry doing relationship with these boneheaded characters who time and time again seem to get things wrong more than they get it right. And he demonstrates for us the means through which he's going to spread this new way of interacting and having a relationship ultimately with God. And he does it through relationship. Which is why the enemy's strategy is going to always be to try to isolate you. He's going to try to pull you out of relationship. He's going to tell you, man, if you open up and if you're vulnerable, if you tell your story, if you say what's really on your mind, then they're going to think you're crazy. They're going to think you're nuts. They're going to call and have, people come and take you away and take you to padded walls room. And he's going to always try to isolate and pull you out of community. That's one of the greatest, probably, side effects that we still don't even fully understand of COVID, is this isolation and what it caused and what it did to people. Because relationships is the means through which we live and interact with each other. And not just personal relationships, but interpersonal relationships. There's been this common phrase that a lot of times get used in non-denomination circles where we talk about, I have this personal relationship with Jesus, where it's just like me and Jesus, like we're sitting, it's the two of us in a car, the two of us in a couch, and it's just me and him. We have this personal relationship with Jesus. Where when we look at Jesus' life, when we look at the New Testament, the reality is we have more of an interpersonal relationship with Jesus. Like, you can't just do you and Jesus by yourselves and grow in your relationship with him. It doesn't work that way. It requires more and more interpersonal relationships. It requires your spouse. It requires your kids. It requires the people on your street. It requires the people in the opposite row of you to grow in your relationship with Jesus. It requires the people that you don't get along with to grow in your relationship with Jesus. Because you need that friction that to grow as you're building these muscles of faith to be able to become more like Jesus. You need that opposition. So the means is this interpersonal relationship we have. And then last, we had this idea of that's the goal, right? The goal of our existence. Ultimately in heaven, we're going to be in relationship with Jesus and with each other, and it's going to be awesome. But a lot of times we kind of just figure that's a thing for the future at some point, and we just live our lives as if we're just silos and islands unto ourselves. But what if we started practicing, we started working on what does heaven look like? How do we start experiencing that now? If the end goal is this relationship community that we have, then what would it look like to start building and working on that today? The disciples did not stay in the upper room by themselves with this movement of the Holy Spirit and love, all the things that were happening and just stay there. They went and they started bringing heaven to earth by starting these churches and pouring into people this very slow but methodical process of just over time pouring into people, and gradually we have what we have today as a result of that slow and methodical process. Because 4 point, one of our primary things is relationships. It's not a secondary thing. You can't skirt your way around this. I'm an introvert. You know what? I don't really get along well with people. Like, those things don't allow you to put relationships in the secondary category. When it comes to following Jesus, relationships are a primary aspect of who we are. It's the starting point, it's the means, and it's the goal through which we exist. And we're called to. So if you have your Bibles with you, I would encourage you to turn to Acts chapter 3. Or if you have your phones, you can pull out the Bible app. The notes are in there. Acts chapter 3, starting with verse 1, it says this. It says, one day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Peter and John were on their way. And I wanted to stop here because I feel like this Peter and John relationship is kind of eclectic, to say the least, right? It's this weird thing. I almost looked at it and kind of did a double take because I don't see Peter and John being friends, right? If you read the different Gospels and the Gospel accounts, there's the story of when Jesus is being arrested, someone pulls out their sword and takes a swipe and cuts off an ear, right? Well, Matthew and Mark and Luke, they all kind of leave it as anonymous. They all kind of say, and one of the disciples or someone pulled out their sword. Where John just flats out says, Peter took out his sword and he took a swipe, right? Or in John's gospel, he's constantly saying, right, I'm the one, the disciple whom Jesus loved. And you kind of feel like there's this tension between Peter and John, like this competition, right? And even to the point where John's like, yeah, when it came to running to the tomb, the fact is the disciple whom Jesus loved got there first, where the Peter came in a distant second, right? In fact, I thought it was fun. I saw this video, someone shared it with me. I want to share it with you real quick, just a real quick. You want to get any audio on the computer?
What is the meaning of it?
I'm going to try one more time. There we go.
John! What is the meaning of this?
They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first.
You made a diss in your gospel towards me?
What's the matter, Peter? You gonna deny that too?
Whoa, hey, Peter. Look, we both know I'm faster than you. You can't catch me. That's it!
Right, I read this right out of the gate, Acts chapter 3, right? Up to this point, it's been the Holy Spirit pouring out and the awesome things that are happening, and now it's like, let's put this into motion. And the two people kind of paired together to do this are Peter and John, right? One day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Peter and John were on their way. This is an unlikely relationship. Right? Part of our growth, part of our becoming more like Jesus is looking around and seeing, are there people who are not like you who count themselves one of your friends, one of the people that would feel comfortable being around you? Because what we like to do is we kind of live in silos and we have different viewpoints and we make sure people know what our viewpoints are, what our politics are, and it becomes easy because all of a sudden we just attract all the people who just think and act like us. And today we have one of the most segregated kind of cultures that, I've got 40 years of life experience, so I can't speak forever. But as far as I've known, it just feels like we're more and more just pushing each other to our different sides of the corner where it's just a bunch of groupthink and everybody thinks like themselves. And we see this relationship of these two unlikely characters that are paired together and are part of a bigger mission of saying, we're going to be a part of this way movement. And it's a challenge for us because that's not something that comes natural for us. It's not something that comes easy for us. And as the story goes on, Peter and John were on their way into the temple for prayer meeting. Now, this is important because, up to this point, the Jews all participated in religion by going to the temple for daily prayer times, right? That is something that they were used to ritualistically, just like offering sacrifices on a regular basis to cover their sins, right? So what we see here is Peter and John, this unlikely relationship, participating in this tradition. Although Jesus came and by what he did on the cross, what he did through resurrection, you didn't have to go to the temple anymore to just pray and have relationship with God. You could do it anywhere, but Peter and John still participated in this tradition of going to the temple on a daily basis, right? So here we believe relationships primary, traditions are secondary. There's a good chance that some of you actually came to faith as a result of some traditions. Maybe it was a different denomination. Maybe it was just the place that your family grew up going where there was some traditions, some things that they said, we're going to participate in following Jesus in this way. Not necessarily primary things, but just things that we're going to do. And traditions are always going to play a secondary part in our role in relationships and in following Jesus, our relationship with him. For some of us, they're a means to a relationship. They help us. But for some people, we put traditions on a pedestal to say, man, if people aren't doing it this way, then they've used that as a way to break relationship, to say, you know what, you're wrong, we're not going to love you, you're not welcome here because you don't do things our way. And what they're choosing to do is put traditions in the primary category, to say there is a right and specific way to do things. And I love how Peter and John here still participate in these traditions, but they don't go around telling people, like in any of the New Testament, that you have to go to the temple in order to have this prayer relationship with God. Because for them, it was a tradition they were still going to participate in, but it didn't become an idol to them. And it's important for us because religion, faith, tends to become an idol all of and of itself. Something if we're a part of for a long period of time, it becomes kind of our world. And again, we surround ourselves, those are the only people we know, and it becomes an idol that we will fight tooth and nail to the death to make sure we don't lose our rights, to make sure we don't become oppressed here in America when it's not meant, that's not the goal. The goal is relationships. And as religion, for some of us, comes a stumbling block towards building relationships with the people around us. I would argue, yes. More often than not, it's those traditions moved into the primary category that tend to isolate us from the world around us. And this is kind of the background to the part that comes up, right? So as they're going to the temple, at the same time, there was a man crippled from birth. And I love the language here. I feel like Luke is super intentional with the language he used. And language, for all of us, I believe it should be something that we are super intentional to do. Even this morning, Emiliano pulled me into the hallway and he said, Jimmy, I want you to look at the way that I put these posters in those marquee poster spots out there, right? And I'm thinking, how crazy can this get? And he says, I was super intentional because I wanted them to tell a story as people were walking into the theater, right? And I just got all giddy. I'm like, man, that's awesome. That's it language, right? Even if it's right, even if you think it's a story that makes sense, in E's mind, he said, I'm going to be super intentional because I want people subconsciously to hear a story about Ford Point as they're walking in this morning. I wish all of us were super intentional with our language. And here Luke does something very important. I think it's important for all of us to do in our language of people. When we're looking to build relationships, if that's the goal, is to build relationships with the people around us, Luke does something very specific here. And I want you to notice that he puts the crippled from birth part after the man. Right? A lot of times in our language, in our culture, we say the crippled person or the blind person or the handicapped person, and we put the affliction first, and that what that does is that defines the person. The person becomes defined by that. But Luke is very intentional here. He was a man first, a human being first, a creation first, who was crippled from birth. Just a side note. I would encourage you to try to adjust your language likewise when you're talking about people. Every day he was set down at the temple gates, the one named Beautiful, to beg from those going into the temple. In a few more chapters, in chapter 4, we're going to learn that this man is just over 40 years old. So for 40 years, give or take, he's been coming to the same spot of the temple to just beg for food, to beg for money, to beg for things. But the interesting part is he's on the outside of the temple, because to go into the temple, you had to have some kind of a semblance of having it all together, being without blemish. And a man who was crippled is visually, from the outside, obviously with blemish. He's got some issues. So he would not have been allowed to go to inside the temple. And man, I wonder if that does not reflect all too often how people feel about the modern church here in 2024. That based on their behavior, based on their lifestyle choices, based on the past that they've experienced, the things that maybe they've done, they would not be welcome inside a church because they are with blemish. And Peter and John, what's going to happen is they're going to set a tone, not just for this story, but for really what should be the foundation of the New Testament church, which you and I are a part of. And this morning, our goal is to realign ourselves towards that. to maybe shake free from the cultural Christianity that we know and get back to the basics of what it looks like to be a New Testament church. And Peter, John see this man who's been ignored, who's been left to just stay on the outside, wishing to be on the inside, and set a standard for us. And interesting enough, this man who was crippled chose to set up spot at the temple gate, the one named Beautiful. This gate kind of got this reputation because of its decoration, because of its ornaments, because of the money that was used to build this gate as being nicknamed the Beautiful Gate. Imagine that the temple itself was a thing to behold. I mean, there was literally spared no expense when it came to building the temple. It would make any of us probably just jaws drop to go in and experience the beauty that was the temple. And here's one of its gates, and this particular gate got this reputation of this beautiful experience of being the one gate that was the most beautiful. It got the nickname Beautiful. And I contrast, all the resources that went into building the temple, that went into building this beautiful gate. Probably why he chose to sit there, because most people wanted to go through the beautiful gate and see all the sparklies from the beautiful materials used. And while I believe with all my heart, God is worthy of all the resources that we have, how responsible are we with our resources? Because it's very easy for us as churches to kind of build little beautiful gates, one at every corner, just pour our money into it for the sake of being beautiful. But it's the spot where this man who's been crippled is left to just look from the outside in. Just recently we went to Atlanta and we were at this rather big church called North Point, and I just love the things that we experienced, the different sessions we were able to go to, but at the same time I started thinking, I wonder how much money this budget it takes for all the people who are on staff here, for all the lights that are going on here, all the things that they had to purchase, how much money went into this one location. And then they have multiple locations. And then there's, as you probably know, multiple church of different denominations and shapes and sizes all across the country. So I did some research, and I want you to know, do you know how much money goes into the Western church here in America? The Western church here in America has an annual income of some $74.5 billion. Right? That's how much money goes into not just Forward Point, not just North Point, but all the churches in the United States of America. If you were to put that on the Fortune 500 list, the American church would be at the 52nd spot of the Fortune 500 companies. That's where we would be. And I begin to think, how much of that resources that we have that are coming in are used to help with the problems that the world has versus just kind of creating all these little systems where you got to have a pastor, associate pastor, youth pastor, children's pastor, lights on, all these different things that are great, but have they just become kind of the default operating system for our current church versus choosing to be responsible for those resources? That's why some of the values that we set up here at Forward Point, right, is that we're going to value the passionate volunteer over the paid professional, because we believe that, it's easy if you have the money to just spend it and hire somebody to fix a problem or a need. We got some young people coming in, so we got to hire a youth pastor. So let's go on the youth pastor websites to have all the resumes, and let's find the one who's got the best deal for the least amount of money, right? And let's just throw money at it. And that has become the default operating system, is just to throw money at the different areas of need in churches instead of people working in relationship to get it done. It's not to say that we're not going to have a paid staff. Maybe at some point, it's not to say that, buildings are bad, lights are bad. No, it's not about that. But it has to be where we just don't become easily used to throwing money at problems. And replicating this issue of just building beautiful gates, but all around are people on the outside looking in, wishing that they could be a part of it. So that's why we believe and the passion to volunteer over the paid profession. That's why we believe in fixing broken things versus going out and buying new things. That value is a big part of you and I first, right? That we are broken things, and we're not just going to trade all the broken people in for the nice, shiny, have it all together people. But also in our resources, that we're going to do whatever we can to be wise with our resources, because we don't want to be part of a culture that just throws money at it, when what we see in the book of Acts is this much bigger way to handle our resources. So this is the scene that we have, right? This man who is crippled, and Peter and John, this unlikely relationship, and their worlds are about to collide as they meet each other. When he, the man who was crippled, saw Peter and John about to enter the temple, he asked for a handout, right? He said, Peter, with John at his side, looked him straight in the eye. And I thought this was so important, right? Because I don't know about you, but when I'm driving around and there's people at the corner, the last thing I want to do is make eye contact with people. Right? In fact, as I'm driving, I try to time my stop to the place where the little part of my car that, right, there's the window, and then there's this window, and there's this part of the car that everything connects to. That part lines up where it blocks the person on the corner, so I do not have to look at them, right? Because what happens when I look at them? What happens when I make eye contact with them? All of a sudden, I start to feel like the melting of humanity in my heart, right? Like I realize that they're a human, and man, I'm not being so much of a human, and that transaction happens, and I try to avoid that transaction. I don't want it to happen, but Peter, with this new kind of inspiration of the Holy Spirit, sees this person that, they've probably walked by dozens, if not hundreds of times, right? Because when Jesus was here with the disciples, they on the regular would go to the temple. And I would imagine that this is not the first time that he's seen this individual, but it is the first time that he stops and he looks him right in the eye. And there's something so important about stopping and looking at another person straight in the eye. Right? You know what it's like to talk to somebody and they're kind of like always looking around you or looking to the side, right? You're like, hello, I'm over here, right? Like you don't feel listened to. You don't feel like they're paying attention. You don't feel like they value you because they're kind of looking towards the next person or the next conversation, right? But man, when somebody looks you straight in the eye when they're talking, it's probably almost scary nowadays, right? Because we're like, I'm not used to this. What do I do, right? In fact, I'd encourage you, what the research has said, if you want to tell somebody that you are 100% engaged with what they're saying, don't just look them in the eyes, but you actually look directly into their left eye. I kid you not. It's scientific. The left eye is where it's at if you want them to feel the most engagement from you. And what that does is it begins to restore dignity to people, especially people who are sitting on the outside looking in. Because all too often than not, most people are trying to avoid them, are trying to not look at them. But when we are faced with the job description of relationship, it's the starting point, it's the means, it's the goal. If we're called to build relationships with people, then it's going to challenge us to begin to look some people in the eye to help begin this process of restoring dignity to people who don't feel very dignant. One of the things I loved about the last place that we were at in Indiana is they set up this food pantry, only they didn't have it set up like a normal food pantry. Their goal was for it to feel like a shopping experience for people. Because most of the time, if you need food, for one, you're kind of feeling sad that you even need to ask for a handout or ask for food. Then you go to it and it's just kind of all just thrown out there and you just kind of pick and choose. And what they did is in their building, they set up their building to look like a grocery store so that people would get a cart and they would go in and they would shop like normal. And the experience would make them feel like they just went shopping for their food and didn't go to a food pantry. Because more than just handing out food, their goal was to restore dignity to people, was to help people feel like they were humans, to not feel like they were, a homeless person or a poor person, but Maybe a person who just was dealing with some bad set of circumstances. And we know that there's always going to be people. Jesus said, you're always going to have the sick and the suffering and the homeless and the hurting, sure. But desire me more than all that. And when you do, man, you can't help. You're going to be challenged in your pursuit of relationship with the people who are not like you. Politically, economically, maybe skin color-wise, backgrounds, all of that. We're called to enter into relationship. And it's amazing, when you look at someone in the eyes, you don't see all the other stuff that tends to divide us. You don't see the clothes that they wear. You don't see their behaviors. You don't see their politics. You just see a human being. And that's what Peter and John did. Just look this man who hundreds, if not thousands of times have been looked over before. And looked him straight in the eye. And began this process of initiating relationship with him. And this is so important, man. It's one of the reasons I feel like life-changing. When I had our first child, when we had Justice, I remember being in the hospital there, and Chaslet was asleep, and I just was like caught in her eyes. As beautiful as I thought she was, as amazing, that all of a sudden all the things went it through my mind about, man, she's going to break my heart someday when she gets married and I have to walk her down the aisle, right? This is where I made decisions to like build a tower someday where she's locked into it, where she can never get out of it, right? Because I'm just sitting there holding her. I'm just looking in her eyes. And I'm like, man, I don't ever want to forget this. I don't want to ever not remember this. So I'm going to take video of it. So I just pulled out my iPhone, Team iPhone, and started filming her eyes. Because there's something life-changing that happened in this moment. Man, I experienced a love that I had never in my life experienced before when I started holding Justice and just looking in her eyes. And I just remember being there, no one making any noises. And then as I'm watching her more and all the facial expressions that she's making and, kind of grimacing and not having any teeth, I thought, man, also, when else am I going to see Justice, what she looks like as an old person, right? Because I'm going to be gone before she is. This is my one chance. My one chance to see what she looks like as an old person. But this is why we build our purposes around life groups. This is why on Sunday mornings we're so intentional to try to get people engaged with each other, because we feel like if going to be a place where we can start practicing restoring some dignity in each other's lives, it's here. It's in life groups. But if we just do them here and we just do them in life groups, then we become like a swamp where we're getting poured into and nothing's coming out, because you and I were created to build relationships with each other, but also to the people who are not here and who are not in your life group, who are on the streets, who you would rather not make eye contact with. So Peter, with John at his side, looking him straight in the eyes, said, look here. And notice that he looked up expecting to get something from them, right? Like he wasn't even looking at them. He's just asking for things, but he's not even looking at them. There's a sense of shame where he's just looking down and he can't even make eye contact with people anymore. But they stop to look him straight in the eyes, and he thinks, oh, I got something. They're making contact with me. And Peter said, you know what, I don't have a nickel to my name, but what I do have, I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, walk. And at first, I kind of aligned myself with Peter, right? Because I'm the first one. When someone asks me for money, I'm always like, oh, you know what, I don't have anything on me, right? And I just keep on walking as fast as I can because I don't want to have to engage. But if the goal is relationship, if that's the starting point, if that's the means, if that's the goal is relationship, then I can't get away with just, you know what? I don't have anything on me. I'm out, sorry. Because what we notice here is that you can't give Forward Point what you don't have. And what Peter had something very deep, very spiritual, his relationship with Jesus. And he says, I'm going to give you dignity. I'm going to look you in the eyes. And I'm going to give you something that you were not expecting when you woke up this morning. Get up and start walking. And in that moment, he grabbed him by the right hand and he pulled him up. And in an instant, his feet and ankles became firm. He jumped to his feet and walked. And the man went into the temple with them, walking back and forth, dancing and praising God. And everybody there saw him walking around and praising God. And they recognized him, right? This is the guy who's been here, decades, right? We over and over, we've seen it. They recognized him as the one who said, begging at the temple gate beautiful, and rubbed their eyes like, for real, right? Astonished, scarcely believing what they were seeing. And the man threw his arms around Peter and John, ecstatic. And all the people ran up to where they were at Solomon's porch to see it for themselves. Now, forward point, God may give you the gift of healing, but the reality is most of us probably have no idea. Because we haven't even got to the spot where we're able to look somebody in the eyes. Somebody who's different than us. Somebody who's in pain, somebody who's hurting. Right? We're fine with maybe setting up a meal train. We're fine with maybe sending a card, and those things are important. But when someone is going through a hard time, when was the last time that you just opened up your schedule to just sit with them as they cried? Right? To help restore dignity to people going through some of the hardest times. When I look back at some of the times of ministry I've been a part of, some of the things that I loved the most was different times when I went into nursing homes. And I would just go, and man, I just loved making people who were in nursing homes laugh and smile. Because most of the time, people who are in nursing homes, they don't die from diseases or old age even. They die from loneliness. They die from broken hearts. From a loss of dignity. And very few people will go and just build relationship with them because there's nothing, you don't get anything in return from that. And in our value system, we don't prioritize that. You build relationships with the people who are going to be able to help you back, who are going to be able to do something for you. But how often in your life, in your walk, do you orient it around relationships where you're not going to get anything back in return? Where your goal is just to, restore and bring as much dignity and joy and life into that person as you can without receiving anything in return. That's the kind of relationship that God has called us. That is the point of our existence. The starting point, the means, the goal. Not just with the people you like, not just with the people who happen to be at the same place as you on a Sunday morning, but at your workplace, in your neighborhood, and all the places, your grocery store, all the places that you normally go are just breeding grounds for relationships to be built. Love handles is just a breeding ground for relationships to be built. Man, and I contrast love handles when we were on this trip and we were on our way back to the airport to return the car. We had to stop at the gas station, right, to fill up the rental car because you gotta fill it up. Otherwise, they charge you a bunch of money if it doesn't come back full, right? So we stopped at this gas station, and we made this whole trip without going to any kind of ice cream place. No frozen yogurt place, no ice cream place. So I considered myself having, achieved one in the discipline book as a result of that. But we get to this last place, and wouldn't you know, inside this gas station is a frozen yogurt shop. Right? They have this little frozen yogurt shop, and they call it Swirl World here in Georgia, right outside the airport. And man, all of a sudden my eyes get big, and I'm thinking, this is amazing. But I go to this frozen yogurt shop, and there's all these signs on the machines that say out of order, not working right now. And they're the kind of machines we have. So I'm like twitching because I'm like, I could fix this. Right? Just let me at it. And it says 41 toppings. And my wife and I, we look at the toppings, and it's like 4 toppings that are just repeated over and over and over again. There's like 12 containers of M&Ms, 12 containers of Reese's Pieces, right? Like it's all these things from the outside. Man, this is the Temple Gate beautiful. You know, if this is torture, chain me to the wall, right? Like, but you get there, you go in, and it's just empty. Useless, broken. For show. And I thought to myself, man, how much is the modern day church like this? There's all sorts of neon signs, cool lights, but you dig deep and it's just a show. There is no relationship. There's not even a person there. And it's just empty. And I contrast that to some of the stories that I hear about people who are becoming a part of Ford Point. There's a young lady whose name is Martha. Martha, you here today? Martha, is that you back there raising your hand, Martha? Yes, Martha, man. Martha first started coming to Love Handles. She came to Love Handles, I think it was for one of the Christmas events, for the Grinch. And wouldn't you know, we had this pesky character there, this guy, his name is Lee, who just likes to make friends with everybody. Right? Still trying to figure out how to get rid of him. And he just starts talking with Martha, and man, we'd love to have you. We do, you know, on Sunday mornings over at the theater, come on over. And she was planning on coming, right? Who wouldn't come from an invitation from Leroy? But that first Sunday that she was going to come, she couldn't come because she was in the hospital. And we only knew that she was in the hospital because Leroy was texting her. And finding out, hey, what do you need? What can we be praying for you for? Even before she stepped foot here on a Sunday morning, Leroy was just all up in her business, building a relationship with her. And now we can't get rid of Lee, and now we can't get rid of Martha. And now Martha's bringing all sorts of kids who come in with her, and I think probably the majority of our kidmen now is kids coming with Martha, and she said, man, I just love what they're getting here. Because somebody said, you know, I'm going to take advantage of this tool to build relationships with people by actually building a relationship with someone. This last week, I was meeting with a young man who came to this point where he said, you know, I feel like I just want to turn and give my life back over to God. And just was talking to me, confessing different things that he wanted to get off his chest. And I started inquiring about, you know, what brought you to the place to say you wanted to start coming back on Sunday mornings. And he said, you know what? I was upstairs helping clean up Kidman. And there was these 2 ladies who both, Kiwi and Katrina, who said, man, we would love to see you back here next week. And he said, man, something about somebody saying they would love to have me back. Something about the restoring of dignity back into this young man's life filled him with enough to say, man, I got to meet with Jimmy. I got to make Sunday mornings a priority. I want to get baptized. Because the relationships are the starting point, the means, and the goal of our existence. And it's time for you and I to say, how are we going to step outside of our comfort zone of Sunday mornings and life groups and start to get into, man, Sunday fun days, where we're just meeting out under the marquee, and whoever comes by, we're going to have different things to give that are going to be not tracts, not 4 spiritual laws, but just yummy treats and goodies to build relationships. The 2-year anniversary is all built around building relationships. We say it's $1 froyo because when they come to pay, we give the customer $1 to say, man, we just are so grateful for you, and we give them $1 for their froyo. We're probably going to spend, you know, some $500 on top of the froyo expenses just paying people because we want to have that moment to say we are so grateful for you that you are here to support us. Do you know that there's a God who loves you even more than we do? And hope to begin to start all sorts of relationships with people. Because this is what is primary for point relationships. Your traditions, all of that other stuff, man, secondary. I hope you find a place where they're doing things the way you like. But for your spiritual growth, I pray that you find a place that is not doing it the way that you like. And you can come to a place and say, you know what, it's not about me. It's about my relationships. And I'm a part of the process of restoring dignity to the people around who are not like me, and start looking people in the eyes. God, we're so grateful